thank you all very much for the opportunity today, especially those of you who are still upright. I know 2:30 is the prime spot to talk in the afternoon, so thanks for those who've stuck around and tried to stay awake. Really thank you, Tom Hilditch. I know Paul already thanked him, but really pulling this all together has been fantastic. What I want to do today is give you just a brief look through our lens on what it's like dealing with the Endangered Species Act, trying to implement on-the-ground habitat projects where we intersect with the Endangered Species Act. And just before I really get into it, I just want to mention two colleagues that I have here today. Erling Armson in the back is one of our biology experts, and Lynette Mader up at the front is heading up a new restoration services program. So if you want to talk compensation, she's the person to talk to. I was thinking about the fact that I could probably start just by saying ditto to Gord Miller and sitting down, but then I thought maybe I should go through some of the picture slides, as people have mentioned. And I did put some text in, realizing sitting at the back, just straight old pictures would have been great. For those of you who don't know us, we're part of an international family, Ducks Unlimited in the US and Ducks Unlimited in Mexico. You can see our mission up there on the board really is to conserve, protect, restore, manage wetlands and their associated habitats. In Ontario, we're striving towards no net loss of wetlands in the province and looking at restoring a portion of those that have already been lost. It's a pretty exciting year for us, not as old as the ROM, but we're in our 75th anniversary year, so we're pretty excited about that. And in Ontario alone, we've conserved over 948,000 acres of habitat. Thank you. Like most of you would know, I know I'm talking to a crowd that's in the know, wetlands have a huge diversity of functions and values. And really, you know, the one that we're here to talk about today is the species at risk habitat value. Wetlands and their associated habitats are key to many species at risk, you know, including anything from the Lake Erie water snake, Ogden's pondweed, lake shubsucker, least bittern, Blanding's turtle, and many, many others. It's my first attempt at having a slide automate itself, so thank you, Erling, for helping me out with that. Seemed to go okay. We have a long history of well-designed projects based really on sound biological criteria and highest engineering standards, and that's led to an investment by Ducks Unlimited of over $58 million in Ontario, developing this impressive portfolio I talked about of conservation projects. And we need to maintain those projects, maintain those habitats to ensure both their safety from the water management structures we have, infrastructure, as well as the biological integrity and biodiversity of those. So that 948,000 acres is made up of about 2,000 habitat projects and about 2,500 landowners. Primarily across southern Ontario, although we do have some projects, as you can see, hopefully you can see on the map up farther into the north. But despite our efforts and efforts by the province and by other conservation organizations, we know we've lost already about 72% of our original wetland acres in the province, and in some parts that's more than 80%, and we know that loss is continuing. So really, if you think about it, and we're all on a similar page here, I think, in terms of what we want as an outcome, I think where we differ is how we think we're all going to get there. You would think it would be easy to restore and manage these habitats. They have such great diversity of values, and we know those values, and those values are recognized. So imagine my surprise 6 years ago when I came to Ducks, and I thought this was going to be just the coolest place to be, just putting habitat in the ground and talking to the government about all the great things we're doing. And what's happened is about 60% of my time is focused on trying to remove regulatory and policy barriers to doing exactly the wetland conservation we're talking about. All of our projects, we follow the appropriate permits and regulations, of course, and those include everything from a permit to take water, Lakes and Rivers Improvement Act, Endangered Species Act, Conservation Authority regulations. And it takes resources, both in staff time and dollars, away from money we could be putting into the ground, into the habitats that we're actually trying to conserve. So like Joe said before me, it can get very frustrating, more for our field staff, just in the time it takes to get us through some of this. So what about species at risk and the Endangered Species Act? Well, great news. Wetland projects, the projects that we're working on and other conservation groups work on, attract species at risk. This is fantastic. And we take pride in the fact that they do, and that they are species at risk habitats. We should be celebrating. However, when we go to manage these projects, manage the dams, dikes, infrastructure, the water level infrastructure, to ensure that we can keep those habitats on the landscape, manage the water levels to ensure the biodiversity of these projects continues. If they've been successful and they've attracted a species at risk, we're probably going to be required to undertake either extensive flora and fauna surveys that, again, require resources we may not have to do that. You know, remembering, again, we're a not-for-profit. Fundraise dollars, is that really where we want to be putting them, or do we want to be putting those dollars into habitats on the ground? We experience some significant time delays in these projects, even if they are allowed to proceed, and in some cases, we're stopped altogether from proceeding on these works. And I know we're not the only ones. I've had a couple people talk to me here about similar situations they've been in trying to implement on the landscape. All in all, it's really an increased cost and often leads to us, DU, walking away from the projects altogether, and that's not really the ultimate intent in the long-term survival of these habitats. We also restore these wetlands that have been lost, drained from the landscape. Again, the Endangered Species Act process can really complicate these projects, can be frustrating, making them more costly and delayed. It can be long review times, requested surveys of wetlands and the adjacent upland habitats, reduced timing windows for project implementation, or timing at a time of year where the cost is significantly more to try to implement those projects. An inconsistent approach by districts, so we may not have the same approach in one district as another, and that makes it tough for our staff to know what they need to be doing in different areas. And again, the result can be that either we and or the landowner walk away from the project. In some cases, trying to meet the requirements of the legislation can be more expensive than the project value itself, and that's hard to justify then. And again, not good for the long-term survival of these habitats. So we know there's always a solution to everything. These pieces of legislation weren't put in place to create the issues they have. I've heard the word used a couple of times, unintended consequences. So we've had some success in tight timing situations. In 2009, we were able to implement 58 wetland projects within an extremely short window, 3-month period, with federal infrastructure money. Like any of you who work for a nonprofit that's implementing, never dare a nonprofit to try to spend money in a short-term window. We'll all do it. We managed to do that. We were really proud about it. Out of all those projects, during construction, which obviously you can tell if we started in November, was in the winter months, we found one Blanding's turtle on those 58 projects across the province. And we want to make sure everybody knows no individual species at risk was harmed anywhere. And those are great projects, great habitat now that maintain and stay on the landscape for those species. Why was it successful? Part of it was this crunch time window, and the province stepped up, helped us with a standard set of criteria for all projects, consistency across districts, and trusted us knowing that we were out there intending to do the right thing and get the ultimate outcomes we were both looking for. So many species at risk obviously are dependent on the healthy, productive wetlands that result from our conservation efforts. And in fact, many of these species at risk recovery plans recommend wetland protection and restoration to achieve species at risk activity. Yet we're still struggling with barriers to protect and restore and manage those very habitats. We're at the stage right now where we're working with some really awesome partners. You know, Paul's mentioned some of that before. You get to spend your vacation time with some of your partner friends, which can be fun. We're also working with some really fantastic people within the ministry, trying to get ourselves towards a solution that addresses the issues that people who aren't implementers see, and those of us who are trying to implement are running into on the landscape. We believe it's possible. We believe we're going to get there. And I've heard before, we're going to have to really think about that together on how we get there. But I believe it really requires recognizing the ultimate value of these habitat projects, whether it's wetland habitat or other habitat projects being implemented, recognizing the ultimate purpose of a ducks and limited wetland conservation project is habitat restoration. A consistent, common sense, risk-based approach is really key. Focusing on the population of a species, not necessarily the individual. And whether that's an amendment to the Endangered Species Act, or as Gord Miller talked about this morning, can it simply be a change to policy around implementation? Whatever works. We'd like to be helping get these habitats on the landscape as quickly and continuously as possible. And make it exciting. I heard that this morning too. Make it exciting when you find a species at risk, not an, oh my God, now what are we going to do? And the end goal really is to make it easier to conserve wetlands than to drain them. That would be awesome. And really, if we don't, the ultimate cost is to species at risk habitat. So my final message would be, let's just think about not letting unintended consequences of things like the Endangered Species Act undermine wetland conservation or other habitat conservation, and conservation ultimately of critical species at risk habitats in Ontario. Thank you.